Hey, what's up, gang? It's me, Mishka. I am back in your ear. What's going on? I had this weird thing where I did this stupid 30-day workout leading up to my birthday because I've had all this anxiety about being both fat and skinny and old and out of shape. So I worked out hard every day leading up to my birthday. And man, I got that one picture where I looked awesome. And then I stopped working out and kept eating the way I was working when I was working out. And I had this thing where I was like, man, I feel like the dry Arizona air is finally getting to me because like my skin feels real tight. Like, do I need to start using lotion for the first time in my life? Nope. Just gained 12 pounds. The reason my skin felt tight is because I was getting fat. So I'm back on it now. My buddy Ryan McKee has successfully moved into the little treehouse in my backyard. We had our first real depressing workout this morning. It's funny because it's like trying to get back into shape at this age feels a little bit like Rodney Dangerfield in Back to School. It's less Rocky and more Rodney. So this is our Rocky Dangerfield workout program. Well, we're trying to go with 30 days. What did we do today? 100 V-ups, twists, push-ups, deadlifts, and squats, and ran 3 miles. Oh my God, this is going to be a long month. Anyway, what else? Let's get right into it. My guest today, David Blum, man, this guy has changed my life so fucking much. In 2008, when I was just a druggie, working some dumb construction gig, there was a call for new writers at the New York Press, which was one of the free weekly papers there, and I picked it up on my subway ride on the way into work, and I was like, you always wanted to be a writer and not just a dumb construction worker. Do or die, motherfucker. Like, just write a thing and send it in. And I submitted something, and I heard back from them that day, and they were less interested in the piece that I had submitted, but I had included a link to my MySpace profile where I had blogged about this drug that I was doing, Opana. And Dave said, why don't you write something about Opana, this painkiller that you've been doing? And so when I got home from work that day, I made myself another cup of coffee, and I just sat down at my computer, and I just wrote the story, the first word, then the next word, until I got to the last word. And then I sent it in. And then the next week, it was the cover story in the New York Press, and they had paid a painter to illustrate my drug-addled hallucinations. And suddenly I was a writer. And I wrote a bunch of pieces for Dave when he was at New York Press. And I have a bunch of friends who are like on the cusp of publishing their first books. And what I say to them is something that my agent said to me, which is, don't count on this book to change your life, which is great advice for a new author. Publishing that first article with Dave Blum changed my fucking life. It didn't just change my life. It changed who I was. Like, I looked at myself in the mirror differently. I was like, I've been anointed by an editor at a newspaper. I am a writer. And I'm sure it made me real hard to deal with for my friends and bandmates for a while. So I was a writer for a moment, and then Dave left the New York Press, and I bottomed out and got sober. And then one day he hit me up for, to go out to breakfast, and he was like, I'm doing this. I've gone over to work at Amazon, and they're doing this new thing, publishing exclusive content for the Kindle. You should really do this. You can make a lot of money. And I was like, Dave, number one, I don't know anyone who owns a Kindle. There's no way that this is going to fucking take off. And there's so much free content out there. Why would people buy stuff? And if they're going to buy something, why would they buy something from me? And also, I'm sober now, so I don't have any more stories. And And he was like, you don't have one story left? And I said, well, there is that one time that I got shipwrecked. And he literally smacked himself in the forehead and was like, Mishka, you asshole. That's the story. And he was right. And it was. And that was the first story that I published with Kindle Singles. And it went to number one, and then dropped off, and then went back to number one. And my first royalty check was like between $6,000 and $7,000, which was fucking amazing. And I quit my job. I was working at a beauty bar at that point. The next check that I got was more. It was another, $7,000 plus, which was an incredible amount of money to me at the time. I mean, it's still a good amount of money. If you have an extra $7,000, please send it to me. And then that set me up to write The Long Run, which I got a book deal on the back of that, and I still get tiny royalty checks from that story. It's probably sold over 100,000 copies at this point, been translated into, I think, 5 different languages. And, so I published 7 Kindle Singles, 6 of them under Dave. And then I went on to do Cold Turkey for Audible. And it just goes to show, that, trying to find success as a writer, it's sort of like trying to make a baby. You kind of just have to get one past the goalie, and I got my writing to Dave. He recognized that there was merit to the piece itself, and to my writing, and to me as a person, as a writer, that I had a contribution to make. And then he's encouraged me every step of the way. And so I really owe my entire writing career to Dave Blum. And it's fucking heartbreaking that he's no longer at Audible, because now what will I do? But this conversation has been a long time coming. I mean, Dave really is, he's been a tremendous friend to me over the years. He's been an incredible mentor, and he's really part of my origin story. I would not be who I am without him. So, please enjoy this conversation with my editor, my mentor, my tormentor, my old friend, Dave Blum.
Mishka Shubaly is catching up with friends who are arguably more talented than him.
Is your premise that no one is listening? Is that what you think?
No, I do have listeners. The stock joke is, my mom's listening, but she's not listening. But other people are, because every once in a while I flail around on air and say nobody's listening to this, and then I get messages from people being.
I think you have the right. I said this before. I really think you have the right voice and kind of, I don't know, what's the word? Gestalt? Is that the
I feel like I'm getting better at it. A friend of mine, Susie Italiano, sent me a cross stitch that she made, which was just it was just the comma 3 times in all caps in 3 different colors, and she said that's what you say on the podcast.
Oh, everybody has their tick, yeah.
Just before you say
Marin
something
has
brilliant. Yeah,
many of them actually. He gets away with murder. I mean, I think it's actually gotten to be okay to have some. Very few people can. You're better than most. I would put you in the top 20%.
Oh,
I'm
thanks.
not saying all the time, and I would put myself way below you in that. It's really hard. There's, who's like really at like 100% successful? It's really weird. But if you ever stumble on a podcast interview with the actor Edward Norton, that guy happens to have perfect diction. Perfect.
I feel like that.
And I know people who know him and say that's like his thing. Everyone knows that about him. I'm friends with him.
I feel like that's the evolution of Chat GPT. That the way
Yes.
that we'll know that we're talking to a droid is they won't say
that's a good point.
or like, or, you know.
We should hit record. We're hitting on some really big, heavy ideas here. We should get this recorded for posterity.
Yeah.
I mean, that was too good. We need it. Are we recording now?
Yeah, we're rolling. We've been rolling for hours, Dave. I was thinking the other day about the podcast. I think too much about it. And because there's always that eternal question of, do I continue or do I not continue? And when I was just out in the yard working on the car today, and I had a thought that Colin is my friend who produces the podcast. And I had a thought that, like, if Colin ever leaves me, I'll quit. I'll be fucking done, because he does all the admin, minimal editing, preparing the stuff for the air, basically. But I don't journal, and I don't really go out to lunch with friends anymore, because I live in the fucking middle of the desert, and it's a desert of friendship as well. And so this is sort of my social life, and also this is my sort of journal of my life,
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great use of it. And that's, I mentioned Marin. I mean, he really unravels on his podcast constantly. And it's actually, I went from not listening to the opening stretch of the Marin podcast to becoming only interested in the opening stretch. And then there are times that I listen to that and turn it off. The part where he rambles on about, like, I had a colonoscopy last week, and suddenly I've confronted the whole, deep, dark infinity of the soul. Yeah, like those rambles, which I love, and I think that's what you are talking about. What you want to do, what you do.
Marin is actually, I'm not a big listener of his podcast. I've listened to some of them. I listened to the one with Slash, of course, and like Keith Richards. But I would definitely count him as sort of one of maybe four people who has had the largest influence on my live performance, because in, I think it was 2005 or 2000, maybe 2007, before I even got sober, I went to go see him perform in the basement of the UCB theater with my friend Ryan McKee, who's been on the podcast. And, and Marin was fucking going through it. It was not comedy. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, it feels like the wrong thing to say. I enjoyed that, but I found it really useful. And, he shook my hand and said, I'll accept that. And, but, he was talking through his problems out loud. And I mean, when I record the headers for these podcasts, I used to just try to sort of get in and get out and say who the guest is and what my connection is to them, and then get out. But lately I've been trying to let my guard down and sort of just, again, talk about my colonoscopy or whatever the fuck.
And what about my colonoscopy? You want to get to talk about that?
I mean, that's what we're podcasting about today, right?
Okay. I was told by your producer that I was here to talk about my colonoscopy, which was very successful.
It's actually on my fucking job list to call my doctor to get a colonoscopy, because
you should. You're 46?
46. Yeah.
46.
Yeah,
when I'm 46, that was the inverse. That was the Beatles' original idea, and then they flipped it.
I am President Biden years old. He's number 46. Yeah, that's how I feel. So just a doddering old man propped up by the institution.
But he grew an inch. Did you see that in his medical report that the doctor released on him last week? It reported that he had grown an inch since his physical in 2022.
That's insane.
Very unusual. So highly unusual for almost the entire rest of the human race.
Wow.
Loses height.
Does he just hang upside down like a bat?
I think I actually believe this is just they've manipulated the data, or this is just some ruse to make him look more presidential.
Yeah, I don't think he's the first or the only man who has added an inch to his measurements, if you know what I mean.
I do. I know exactly what you mean. Anyway, why am I here? How may I help?
Well, let's rewind. Let's start all the way at the beginning. I'll catch people up on this a little bit in the intro, but I think people know that my connection to you is that you're the reason I'm still here. You're the reason I have a podcast. You're probably the reason I'm alive. You're the reason I'm successful. You're the reason I made it as a writer. A lot of this rides on your shoulders. You were the first editor to publish my writing in. I guess I published something when I was like 21, but 10 years later, when I was 31, I submitted that unhinged solicitation to the New York Press, and you responded and you let me write a cover story about drugs.
That's correct. I think you know this, but often took that email that you sent, and I would teach at Columbia Journalism School, and where people were always really interested in understanding, how do you get an editor's attention? What kind of cover letters should you write? And I would include that, and I would give them like 10, but I would block out names and stuff. But I would just say, tell me which ones you think. Like I would maybe say like 4 of them are pitches that I've ultimately ended up taking, but 6 aren't. See if you can guess the 4. Never, ever, ever in all the years I did it, did anyone ever guess that the email that you wrote was one that led to a successful writing career. No one. I don't have it in front of me, but I can't remember what it was about it, but it just made me, actually what it did was it made me look at your website. And on your website, had you posted, I believe, an essay related to your experience on
if memory serves, I think the website that you're thinking of is that there was a link to my fucking MySpace account, which
was that what it was? Okay.
That's a significant, cultural signpost.
Yes. If anyone's ever heard of MySpace, that was a wonderful way station, particularly for musicians. And didn't you, you had published something about having those dreams on that drug.
Yeah, I had
that you had. And that's what I responded to. That's what I said I was interested in you writing about.
Yeah, I had written a blog post about Opana. And that was and I think that was what you found. And then and then here we are.
Well, then I got in touch and I said, how about you write a longer version of this? Expand it by like 50%. And you in like 2 days or something, and you said I can do that, and I said okay. If you can do that, I'll make it the cover story of the issue. It was the cover story, right?
Yeah, it was the cover story, and oh my god, I found it. I found the email, Dave.
Oh, you did? It wasn't that long ago. It was in the Gmail era.
2008, February 26th. So almost our 13-year anniversary. Jesus, 15. Jesus Christ.
15 year.
I said, my name is Mishka Shabali, and I'm submitting some writing for New York Press. I've attached some previously published writing samples and a first-person narrative for your consideration. My backstory: I moved to New York in '98, and I've been dodging success ever since. I got my master's in fiction from Columbia in 2003. Promptly realized I was more interested in spending time in bars. I've played in a couple of bands of note, but most of them are just footnotes to footnotes. I'm really overselling it here, aren't I?
When I look at it in hindsight, really, this is so badly written. No, go on.
Well, the flip side of that is I had somebody write me a pitch letter for a novel. I was like, man, if you're sending it to me, you're really fucked. But I read the pitch letter and I was like, note for note, this is a phenomenal pitch letter. Like, this is exactly how you write a pitch letter. It's sort of like, appealed to my vanity, where he said, how much I love your stuff and, admire you as an artist and a writer, and then a synopsis of the book and stuff. And I got to the end and I was like, that is a perfect pitch letter. And this guy will never make it, because I feel like there's an inverse relationship between the quality of the pitch letter and the writing.
I don't know. I usually find them similar. You know, you did have those links. Obviously, this is audio. We can't share the links, but to your website and to that blog, and somehow or another, I read writing that you had done on a very specific topic that I thought was of great interest. I'd been at the Village Voice before that, and I'd always wanted to do a story about a new drug because I thought, man, people are always interested in new illegal substances that expand the mind.
Yeah.
And that's what this was. So you did that. You wrote the longer piece. And, but then I met you and I realized that you were this extremely large alcoholic. And that right around the time of the evening when you were just getting rolling, I was like falling asleep.
Yeah.
But we stayed in touch.
Yeah.
Despite that. And then you did eventually bottom out, or whatever the language is to describe what led you to stop drinking. Well, it's all been chronicled. So if anyone wants to know what happened next, they just need to download The Long Run and Other Stories by Mishka Shubaly with an introduction by Jeff Bezos, which I think still to this moment and beyond was really one of the most remarkable moments in the whole saga.
It's fucking insane. And
you actually engaged the richest man on the planet. Briefly was the richest. He'll be again the richest man on the planet.
Amateur astronaut and billionaire Jeff Bezos.
No, really, he was totally into you. And the whole, I mean, just to explain what happened for anyone who might actually be listening, is that I've been working at Amazon for about almost 2 years, and your piece came out maybe a little under 2 years, but your piece had come out and become very successful. But more importantly, it got you interviewed by the Huffington Post, and so the link to the interview somehow landed in some summary of Amazon mentions in Jeff Bezos's inbox. You know, people always get those press summaries.
Mm-hmm.
So he read it, and so he writes me unsolicited an email saying how proud it made him that I was publishing writers like you, basically, in Kindle Singles. And your narrative of being this ne'er-do-well guy who kind of turns around and suddenly makes, because this The Long Run was a big hit.
Yeah, it's over 100,000 copies sold at this point,
which is crazy. And and it could have been and even bigger. I mean, I think there's it's just such a it was a very powerful story of the intersection of these two extreme situations in your life: alcoholism and ultra marathon running.
I remember too, when I was writing that piece, I remember meeting up for you at lunch, or meeting up with you for lunch, and I hadn't understood that it was going to be like a nice restaurant. I think I showed up in like a sleeveless, like CBG shirt and like cutoffs, like sweaty. And then I pitched you 4 or 5 different ideas, all brilliant, of course. And you were like, yeah, none of these really do anything for me. What you really need to do is write a story about how you went from being this, fucked up, drunk, druggy to being this crazy ultra runner. And
I even gave you the title at that time.
Yeah.
At that lunch.
And I really didn't want to do it, but one of the things that kept me going, that kept me doing. Well, I feel like I sort of tried that first night when I went home. I sort of sat down on the computer and tried to get into it, and then I sent you something, and you said, "Go and get a bigger shovel." Something cryptic, but it made sense to me. And then I just Dave, when I was writing that piece, you were the reader that I had in my mind, and I tried to write it just like I was writing like a private journal entry that one other person would read. And then I sent it to you, and then you sent it out into the world.
Yeah. I've really come to believe, I was a writer for many years and had multiple different editors. some better than others. But I have come to believe, as an editor, now that I've been one for a long time, that there's a very necessary and important, collaboration component to it. It isn't, employer employee. It isn't equal partner. It isn't. It's a lot. There's a lot of things that it isn't, and it's unclear what it is. So you actually have to figure it out. But I thought we did a very good job of balancing each other out. But writing for a person who just to sort of try to extrapolate the broader lesson of that moment. You're right. Having that person to write for.
It's one of the things that has become a staple of what I teach in my writing workshop at Yale, which is, while you're writing, conceptualize your ideal reader and write to them, write to that person, write to a specific person. And in my instance with you, it was I knew that that you understood me and that you believed in me, but also that you weren't going to let me get away with anything. There were instances where I turned something in where you were like, come on, man, this isn't really how you feel, or this isn't really what happened, or you're not explaining it enough, or you're trying to conceal something, or just you're better than this, and so I really worked hard to internalize that as a writer. And it's one of the things that I share with my students, is to have, even if it's not a specific person, to imagine that person and write to them.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. I mean, and I think it's also important to realize that you're never going to know when that magical idea thing, the breakthrough moment happens. So you do have to, by listening to people and getting their feedback and processing it over a period of time really helps. There have been many situations where I've edited people. I don't think you were ever this person. Maybe once or twice you were pretty fast, but I'd give them my notes, and then the next day they would say, you know what, I just did it. I just stayed up all night and here it is. And I'm like, no, I literally can't even read it, because that's not possible. The whole point of the exercise was for you to let it, simmer on the stove for a few days and stir it up and throw a couple of spices in it and see what you think. It's not just, I did it.
I think I feel like I was good at that sort of meditation, or that, that sort of 3 to 10 days worth of mulling it over, because I would always walk away with hurt feelings when I got an email from you that it wasn't right, or that it needed more work, or too long, or too short.
There should be. These are, what? I once had a student say something to me that was just so powerful and profound, it changed my entire way of thinking forever. I said to the class as a whole, you kind of remember when you're giving feedback to these people, to each other. I was explaining workshopping.
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's not personal. It's not personal. It's just about the work. And anyway, actually, she said this immediately. I take it back to the whole class as a criticism of what I had just said. She said, I actually disagree with you. I think if you are talking about what somebody has written down on paper or wherever, that's personal, because it's from them. They wrote it. They obviously have a sentiment and feeling and heart and mind and all this behind it. So if you criticize it, you're criticizing that person. You can't really separate it. So I have come to realize, in collaborating, in editing, in everything, remembering that specific thing, that you never know.
It's like in The Godfather, where he says, it's not personal, it's business, and it's a fucking lie, because
exactly
everything's personal.
Everything is also in The Godfather.
Yeah,
let's just really, if you really want to know how to write, live, do a podcast, I don't know,
disappear
everything.
A body.
Yeah, just watch that, over and over again, and then watch, the combined versions, and just become obsessed with The Godfather, and you could do a whole lot worse.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go and watch that again tonight.
I just happened to watch Godfather 1 last week, with my daughter and her best friend, and it was really fun.
Yeah.
The best friend had never seen it.
Oh, that's the best when you can introduce something
Yeah.
that somebody sort of missed.
Oh my God, yeah. Especially like a thing like that.
I'd never watched Apocalypse Now. And then I watched that, I don't know, 5 years ago, and was like, holy fuck. Because I love Joseph.
Great movie. I mean, I haven't seen it in a while. And then you get old enough and you start revisiting them, and you have the same, you go, oh wow, yeah, right. Oh my God, yeah. I remember when I loved that the last time.
Yeah.
And then the time before that. And anyway, it really is I hope that continues in our new world order becomes.
What's interesting about us having this conversation now is one of the things that has paved the way for us to finally be able to sort of sit down and talk about all this is that you quit, you fucking moved on, you left Audible. And
did I mention, by the way, this is Dave's chat bot talking. This is not he actually couldn't make it today, so whatever this voice says,
you're just chatting it in. I mean, my agent Bird and I were just lamenting that the other day, and that's that's sort of tying into what I was saying about finding your ideal reader and finding an editor who gets you, and an editor that's able to do, because an editor's job is different for every writer that they're working with, and that you were sort of able to do that for me better than anyone else I've ever worked with. And so it's a huge fucking loss that you're not that you're not going to be at Audible anymore.
Well, thank you. I consider myself extremely lucky to have had the opportunity to build two whole things.
Yeah.
Kindle Singles and Audible Originals, both of which live on and will continue to grow. I mean, everybody has all these different things that happen in their lives, and going to work at Amazon was really a glorious one for me, which just sounds weird to say because, Amazon. But hey, everybody makes their own associations. I've been buying from them forever, so there's that. So I'd be a hypocrite if I said they were, a bad company. They're an amazing company. I mean, you get all your shit whenever you want it, as soon as you need it. For what it's a really low price. Amazon Prime, brilliant. I think Jeff Bezos is a freaking genius. How many people have one good idea? He had like 7. It's ridiculous number of good ideas.
And also the foreword that he wrote for my collection is,
but not even, that's the idea of the 8th wonder of the world. It was.
Yeah,
and I actually was telling these people yesterday when I was telling this whole story about how we knew each other, that I don't even know if you remember this, but he actually asked me and Don Katz, who I shouldn't really mention names, but whatever, who's who's the founder of Audible, CEO of Audible, and my friend of many, many years, to draft something for him. So do you remember this part? I think you knew this.
No, anyway, I don't know that I've ever heard this.
We drafted an entire thing over a span of like 3 or 4 days, back and forth, volleying paragraphs, blah, blah, all this stuff. And then we sent it, and Bezos goes, okay, you know what? I think I'm just going to write this myself. Thank you.
Man,
and he just literally chucked our draft. Chucked it.
I really want to read what you were writing, because it sounds like it. I
wonder if I have it somewhere.
Mishka Shabali is very large and also very alcoholic.
I mean, I think he might have taken some facts from it, something like that. But basically, he chucked it, and really wrote, he wrote this really sweet thing, for your listeners who all obviously already love you. You did this extremely charming and sweet gesture of sending him what was it, a shark's tooth or something?
I sent him my drug box the box
That's
that
right.
he used to hold the Opana and stuff, which
Right.
if his house is ever raided and they test like the lining in that. Ooh. But I sent him that, and I sent him a donkey's tooth from when I
That's
got
right.
shipwrecked.
That's right. And that was due to what corresponds, was that with him agreeing to do the forward?
Yeah,
When he agreed?
I just he
Yeah.
said he would
When
do
he
it,
said, I'll do it.
and I wanted to send him a little thank you, so that's what I
So you
sent
sent him
him.
that. And so he used
Which
that. So that was his lead for this forward. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. It's really wonderful reading. It's very short.
which
But he just
also
kicked it off with the tooth. Or he ends it with the tooth, or I forget. He ends with it, I think, actually, now that I think about it. But anyway, it was this beautifully constructed little narrative about you and him and what it means to live. And he really just waxed eloquent. And honestly, to date, it is literally the only time Jeff Bezos ever waxed eloquent in writing about anything other than Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, he fucking nailed it. I remember getting that in my inbox,
Crazy.
and he was sort of like, "Is this okay?" I was like,
It's crazy.
I was like,
I mean,
"Bro,
I don't know that anyone even really understood. I mean, the people I told the story to yesterday, because they all work at Audible, understood it. But, the vast majority of people, even who understand who Jeff Bezos is, or even to understand who you are, but to somehow imagine the two of you intersecting multiple times in this life, one life,
well,
is kind of hard to imagine. And I'm going to also add myself to that list, the fact that I would interact, and let alone the fact, I mean, I don't want to, sound whatever, but that he was, part of this was him being praising of my work, like to
yeah,
have that was, I mean, actually, honestly, really, of all the things that happened over the 12 plus years, I worked
I
at
mean,
both companies, that was really a high point, getting that.
what's wild
And
about that
Obama.
about that fucking God, that the forward from him is, bro, I sent him a crusty old tooth in a fucking little wooden box.
I know, but
Like
he had kept it.
I can't believe I didn't end up on a fucking watch list for that. Like
It was a very
some
sweet thing to do.
unhinged, like,
And the fact that you were able to even, it's kind of more heartwarming that in this day and age, you can somehow manage to connect with somebody so sort of distantly removed.
yeah.
Simply, I mean, there were a lot of things that had to happen. There had to be an internet, and there had to be blogs, and there had to be, Kindles and whatnot. But somehow through all of that, it connected you to the CEO of Amazon
I
in
mean,
quite a remarkable way.
also, when I tell this story, it's always like, oh, me running and having this crazy idea. But it was when you and I went on that run around Central Park, and you were like,
That's right.
what you should do is you
That's right.
should
I did say
write
that.
to Jeff Bezos, and I was like, Dave, that's
And then you
ridiculous.
called me like 8 months later and said, "Guess who called?" And I was like, "Hey, no, guess who wrote?" And I was like, "Who?" I couldn't possibly say, "It was your idea." Don't you remember this? I had no idea that you'd actually done it. And
Well,
then suddenly, like 6 months later, right? It was something like that. He wrote back some
yeah.
crazy
Well,
gap of time,
I think it's no. I mean,
or maybe just
the
you
crazy
waited.
gap was that, I waited, and then I went for a run, and in that sort of
I see.
post-run elation, I emailed him and I was like, hey, who knows, because you gave me his email address. You were like, oh, it's just Jeff at Amazon.com.
Yes,
And I was like,
widely
that's
known.
fucking
Yeah.
ridiculous. So I emailed him after I came in from a run. I was like, I sent that out into the ether, and like, I'm never going to hear back, and it's whatever. I had to do it. Now it's done. And he wrote back in less than an hour. Like my fucking mom doesn't respond to emails that quickly. Like, who responds to emails that quickly? He wrote back.
No, I
and
know.
His first words were like, hey, big fan.
I will say that in my wanderings in the professional wilderness, I mean, this extends to everything, not just corporations, but magazines and newspapers. The length of time that people take to respond is often in inverse proportion to their importance. But they often use the interval of time to try to artificially inflate their importance. But actually, all the great people I have ever interacted with are early to meetings. I did an interview with Anthony Bourdain when I was at Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I got to the restaurant 15 minutes early. He was already sitting at the bar waiting for me. I was like, wow, that's nuts. And I've since learned that he was early everywhere he ever went. He was just thought it was an act of respect. So it's interesting. That to me was a life lesson. Anthony Bourdain was like a whole shit pile of life lessons. He was like the people like Bukowski, those types of people that just everything they said and did was just, oh, I should write that down and remember it forever and live that way.
I met him once when Kitchen Confidential first came out, and I was working as an engineer at a radio station, and I like went down and met him downstairs, and then rode up in the elevator with him, and he smelled like a wet ashtray. And
well, yes, he
was just incredibly kind, and we had a lot of guests come in to that studio, and they all sort of treated me like the help, and he was like, how's your day going? He was one of he treated me like a human being. And
yes,
I remembered him, for that. He was close friends with Mark Lanigan.
Yes, I know that.
Lanigan's memoir is dedicated to Tony, which is
no, I know. I knew they were close.
Yeah.
I mean, I had very little to do with him, but he did really help me out too in my life, in a way that was really special, and he didn't have to. It's just an extraordinary human being. Really, always makes me sad. But
do you want to tell that story?
Which story?
Bourdain
what he did for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I just my first book that I published in 1992 was about the life of a restaurant from its birth till death, and it was called Flash in the Pan. And it sold about 3 copies because it happened to come out in the middle of a recession. So nobody was going out to eat, and the whole notion of a luxury restaurant. I mean, this restaurant just went in the toilet, and it was a wonderful story of 2 roguish characters, and it was really super fun, and I had a fabulous time. It was exactly what I wanted to write. It just didn't turn out to be what most people wanted to read.
Mm-hmm.
So we got some nice reviews, but anyway, nothing happened, and then suddenly, whenever Kitchen Confidential comes out in like 98 or something.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah. So in it, in his foreword, he says there are 3 books that really changed my life and my thinking, and that I feel I must mention here. In influence, and one was George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, and one was like a cookbook, like Alice Waters, something, not that, but something, and then one was my book. So from that moment forward, all I ever got, I would get letters, emails from people, because it had gone out of print, so nobody could get a copy, and this was before Kindle or anything. So everybody was like, "Do you have?" And I had like boxes of them, that I bought from the publisher that nobody wanted. So I just had it in a closet. So I started just mailing it to people. It just felt like a nice thing to do, and then finally I was actually starting to get down to not too many left, and then I got right after I got the Kindle Singles, I got Simon & Schuster to say they would bring it out in that sort of a on-demand paperback and ebook thing.
Wow.
And I because I said I thought I could get a blurb from Bourdain. So then I went to his agent and asked if he would give me a blurb, and he gave me a blurb. Amazing thing. And then, when I got the Kindle Singles, he agreed to do this interview, which was this amazing, absolutely incredible lunch at some little Austrian burger joint on the Upper East Side.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was just like,
how did it feel for you as a writer to write that book and to have it? I mean, I don't want to say fail, because it didn't fail. It reached.
Well, no, because it reached the one person. It's just funny what you were saying. Remember a while at the beginning of this whole podcast? It was very much about. It turned out I wrote it for one person, and I didn't even know who that would turn out to be, somebody so important as Anthony Bourdain, and that it would change my life that he did that. I mean, I didn't change my life. I didn't change my life, but it certainly emotionally was one of the greatest thrills to have somebody who I admired as much as I admired him to say that.
The difference
know?
between 0 and 1 is the largest
Yeah,
difference
it
in the
is.
world, because when the difference between when no one's listening or when one person's listening or one person gets it, that's that's
Yeah.
so massive. I mean, a friend of mine, Christy Coulter, who you may know, who
I know her.
wrote a book about working at Amazon. She was saying, what she posted on Facebook, what advice would you give someone to a new author publishing their first book? And I repeated to her what Bird had told me, which is don't count on this book to change your life, which is, that's absolutely what I did with my memoir when it came out in hardcover. And it fucking didn't, except that, well, Mark Lanigan read a copy, and then I went on to do his book with him, and then he and I became incredibly close friends. So it did change my life.
Well,
It just happened at on a longer curve than I wanted it to.
I will just quote is it a proverb, or is it just something I heard somebody say once, and I'm the only person who knows it? Fame doesn't change who you are; it reveals who you are.
Oh man,
isn't that a profound statement? I love that. Whenever I heard it, I was like, "That's a very," and you can apply it in other situations too, but it works definitely with fame for sure. And I think that's really true. And this is why a lot of people escape into drugs and alcohol, because they honestly feel they can't cope with it. They were troubled kids who became hugely successful adults, but they were the troubled part of their lives would never repair. I mean, I'm currently in a state of obsession for a variety of reasons with John Lennon's life, and he was a perfect example of that. A very, very damaged human being who suffered 2 major losses in his childhood, father and mother both. And, it turned out suddenly to be world famous, and probably was never built for that, really. Who is, but, being a Beatle is like, that's a tall order.
I knew Adrian Grenier a little bit before he got famous. And, we'd heard as a young person living in New York, we'd heard all this shit about how fame changes people. And he kind of just relaxed. He became himself. And, I think looking at him and who he's become and his work, that he is a pretty secure person who was brought up in a loving home, and and for somebody like, for a lot of sort of tortured musicians, I think of Kurt Cobain right away. That I think fame for him made it worse, because when he was just a nobody, at least his external experience conformed with his internal experience of feeling totally like a nobody. And that then when he became famous and people were, Lanigan has a story of like them being in a hotel room and turning on the TV and Smells Like Teen Spirit came on, and Kurt was like, fuck, and threw his shoe at the TV and it hit the knob and turned it off. And at that very moment when it turned the TV off, they could hear from the street a car driving by blasting Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yeah.
And Kurt was just felt, trapped, and this gaping disparity between how he felt about himself and how the world felt about him.
Yes. I think that's what we're really going through right now in the culture, is an absence of those kinds of moments and cultural experiences that actually cause a large number of people to feel moved or changed. You know what I mean? It's a little, once upon a time it was novels or movies or even TV shows. I don't know. It feels a little disparate right now. Exactly. And I feel a little guilty to be part of it. Not, I didn't do anything wrong, but just audio is yet another exploding. I mean, if anyone's listening to this show, which I hope they are doing that in lieu of watching an episode of Daisy Jones and the Six on Amazon Prime, or reading the latest, Barbara Kingsolver novel that's supposed to be so good.
Yeah.
It's like there's really only so much time in the day, and there's so much freaking content. I hate that word even, but it's true.
Oh, yeah, it's such a terrible word.
It is. It's a big gigantic pile of content.
What I tell my students at, in the writing workshop is, you can write anything you want in this class, right? Screenplay, poetry, memoir. There's only one type of work that you can't write, which is content, because content is disposable. It's scrolling. It pops up and then it goes away, but people are, that's one of the things that we've seen, I think, in the last, probably in the last 100 years, if you look back at it, but, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years with the explosion of Audible and audiobooks and podcasts and e-readers and Kindle and Kindle Singles and stuff like that, is that there's, we have these new immediate platforms that just bathe people in constant streams of content, and it's made, I think it's made our lives better as consumers, but it also, it's just because it's a nonstop stream, we're looking for transformation. That's what we want from art. The feeling
100%.
of, I remember being a child and reading My Side of the Mountain, and probably no book, reading that and like Where the Red Fern Grows. And nothing has probably ever had a bigger effect on my life than those, the first time hearing the Beach Boys, or the first time hearing CCR as like a little kid, that just where you're like, what the fuck is this?
And you know what all those things have in common? And this is the same for the things that you make, is that they're specific to the creator and only that creator. It's that one of the most important lessons I ever got was that, it is our job as writers, artists, creators, whatever we are, to go somewhere where we are the only people who can take somebody there and take them somewhere they've never been before. Those are the two tasks of a writer. In terms of engaging them above and beyond a theme or an idea, you want it to be a journey. It's a trip. We all want to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what, and that's this. And, when Stephen King made the leap over to ebooks, and that's what brought me over to it, actually, was when it was announced that he did a short story for like the second generation of Kindle. And my wife said to me, hey, you should do a magazine for Kindle. Look at the Kindle. They're doing all this stuff. And that's what that idea planted ultimately led to Kindle Singles. And Stephen King said, it's just a delivery system. It's just, there are words. It's words on paper. It's words in audio. It's words in ink, e-ink, on an e-reader. Who cares?
Yeah.
Whether it's on paper or not.
I'll tell you what, man, I remember it like it happened this morning. I still remember waking up the morning of the Cape Cod Marathon. I was in New Hampshire. We'd had this huge snowstorm. The long run had just gone up the day before. And then I woke up, like my alarm went off at 4 a.m, so I had to drive down to Cape Cod to run this marathon after this huge snowstorm. And I woke up, turned my alarm off, turned my phone on, went immediately to the Amazon Kindle Singles page, and saw that I had leapfrogged Dean Koontz and Stephen King for the #1 slot. And it felt like sacrilege.
It was amazing. People just know what they want. It doesn't matter. You can do all the marketing in the world. We did some marketing, but at the end of the day, it comes down to how good it is. People just keep forgetting that at their peril. It's the only thing that really matters. To the quote unquote customer, or listener, reader, whatever you want to call it.
To go back to what we were talking about with the sort of ideal reader, I think one of the things that a reader or a listener or a consumer wants is they want to feel like the writer is speaking directly to them. And there were so many times in my life as a child reading Stephen King. I dealt with night terrors like the whole time I was a kid. Still occasionally have really like just out of control nightmares, but I remember just the way he spoke about terror, the way he wrote about terror, just cut me to the core. And
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like a writer is shining a light on you, or seeing you to have.
Yeah, totally. It's a really powerful thing. I mean, it's another drug. Frankly, I've always believed that narrative is a drug. I mean, Aristotle had that explained in the Poetics. I mean, not to get all high toned about it or anything, but that was, no, but it was him. I mean, they knew years ago. It was very obvious. If your main character wants something and he can't get it, and there's an obstacle to it, that it actually gets the heart beating faster. And you're like, is he going to get the thing that he wants to get? Or is he going to be thwarted? And if that thing that's thwarting him, who's that? That's the bad guy, right? Oh, I get it. And and you start to get the hang of it pretty early on, from like the Cat in the Hat forward. Basically, every story is kind of the same. And then you just realize it's the true stories, the good ones. I mean, your story was a journey. I mean, it opened up, didn't it, on the plane or something? Or did we change that? In the long run, you're sitting on the plane, having your last high or something.
Oh, that's a scene.
Was that your last high?
No, that was my last high. No, we changed it because you said, and I will always remember this, Mishka, when you can start a story with a bar fight.
That's right. The bar
fight.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the bar fight. Yeah, because that got you running. And see, now that's another, I'm making it all sound like it's, out of some handbook somewhere. It really isn't. But, having a character running, it also is one of those sort of, obvious narrative triggers. It causes, somebody wants to get somewhere fast, and the only way they can do it is on their own 2 feet. Anybody ever see, Marathon Man, The Graduate? Dustin Hoffman runs a lot in his movies. It's a cool device. People do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it creates narrative drama because who are you running to? What are you running from?
It's a metaphor.
It points to there being an obstacle or a bad guy.
If you can somehow live a metaphor, you're doing great. You can actually you can turn that into coin, I think.
Yeah. The structure of the long run too. I mean, that's classic Greek structure, right? Of in Medea res, start in the middle of action, and then there's a cut back and caught everybody up with the, what was going on.
It was really good, and it worked. And all one form or another, all of your singles, your life has managed to evolve in discrete narrative segments. At some point, you're going to run out. You're just going to get too boring, unfortunately.
I'll tell you what. When I was talking to Bird the other day, I pitched him the story that you and I had been talking about, and he, God bless Bird. I love him, and one of the things I love about him is that he always gives me the fucking straight dope, and he's my friend. So he said, "I'm really sad you went through this, and this will be very, very compassionate hard to sell." And but I think that's one of the things that writers struggle with, is that when we're pitching a story, editors or acquisition editors and agents are looking at it as this is one of the 7 stories available to people, or 7 stories available to tell. And I've always pushed back against that, man, because I think it's fucking bullshit. I think the answer is specificity.
Well, yeah, but it's also, look, the bar has just gone up. There's less money, the people getting laid off, it's a recession, blah, 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 all that stuff. So, it's tougher. So they're basically 2 kinds of books now, the surefire bestsellers, from the top tier authors, and which can include, really A-list quality, I'm not just talking about junk. And then you have, the occasional big swing with a new writer, big high concept idea, or just brilliant writing. But what used to be called, when I was writing and trying to sell books, mid-list books has gone away.
Yep.
Which is sort of, we'll pay you a pretty good amount of money to do a pretty good book that everyone will probably kind of like. No, it's going to have to either be, like really amazing, or have a really, as you said, specific audience. That I think is probably the most valuable. If you can walk in and say, this is for everybody who, like, let's say somehow this show, because I think this episode probably will go viral. I don't know. I just have a gut sense about that. And when it does, you're going to be suddenly in big demand. So you have to contend with that.
Is the secret just to cut off the last sentence of our conversation?
I think so. Whatever it might be, just feel have to look at that but yeah, I mean, look, anything. What the upside of all this is to me is that now anything goes. You can create anything. And why would it be disqualified? Because nobody knows what's working. You just call it a podcast, call it a this, it doesn't matter what it's called anymore. You can just put it out there. I mean, you got TikTok. What is that? 7 seconds of content?
Yeah, one of the things about about the conversation with Bird and trying to sell this book or not, and trying to find a home for my narrative of losing myself in ketamine and then redemption. It's ironic. I was cleaning my bathroom before this. This is gross, but it's all about details and specificity. I was cleaning my bathroom and I found syringes that I bought because my sinuses were so fucking ruined from snorting ketamine, because it's not a powder, it's crystals. So it just tears up your sinuses. My sinuses were so destroyed that I bought the syringes so I could put it up my asshole, because that is another way into that drug. And that was
really. Are you bleeping this later for the?
No.
Put a warning. Everybody, please put a pause on turn the volume down for a moment.
Putting the bottom in rock bottom.
Ooh.
Oh, terrible. But
no. I mean, you always like to go there. That's fine. I love that shit.
It is. Yeah, that's what I do. I say the things that people don't want to think about.
No, and that's really important, and that's a very valuable skill. And there's definitely, you managed to also capture for some people, I can't ever think of the Latin expression, whatever it is, where you're the stand-in, for like somebody else's imagined experience of their own life or whatever. You've done some of the things that they might have wanted to do or thought about doing and didn't do. I've recently been looking at, bands, and for whatever reason, watched some documentaries, and was watching this Daisy Jones and the Six that just went up on Amazon. It's about Fleetwood Mac style band.
Uh-huh.
And there's so much narrative juice just in that topic. And you've had so much of that. You wrote at least one Kindle single that was solely focused on that.
Yeah.
And you're still at it. You're still going out there on tour.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to say about this process of pitching a book or not, and like, do I follow through on this idea or not, is that I don't need to sell a book now. I can just write the fucking thing and publish it wherever I want, in whatever form.
Why not?
As an audiobook, as a podcast, as an ebook. I can physically publish it. And if it makes no money, it doesn't matter, because what you've done for me as an editor and a mentor and an advocate is that you gave me a fucking career, Dave. And that means that I'm free to do a podcast that very few people listen to, that makes no money.
Right.
Because what you did by going to bat for me was you set me free as an artist. And I know I always belabor you with this every time we have dinner, but I'm going to fucking do it here on the public record. I owe you a debt I will never be able to repay. I'm tremendously.
Well, I don't really look at it that way. I obviously, first of all, benefited. Thank you. Very nice of you to say all that. That means a lot to me. I also thought it was mutual. I mean, I gained a lot from you, and I obviously you have a lived experience that I have no clue about. I grew up in a very different life than you, and we intersected. And I remember that first dinner. And by the way, that dinner took place. Our first dinner took place at Anthony Bourdain's Les Halles, and he would have been still. Let me think. No, not sure he would have been the chef there anymore, but that was his restaurant. But anyway.
Yeah.
And we had at least 2 bottles of wine, and you drank most of it. And I was already like falling asleep, and you were just getting wound up, and then you went to the bar, and I left.
Yeah, yeah, and that
I
night
mean, in
went
the
off
journey,
the rails too.
So I'm saying the journey that you went on, and I learned a lot. I mean, I genuinely, found it fascinating, and it was a good measure of whether a story would work. Was whether it was something I was your customer, the person who you wouldn't necessarily think would give a shit about you. I mean, you had your audience, which I've saved you embarrassment of mentioning, that particular subset of humanity that will buy anything that Mishka Shuvalin. I'll leave that to you, to whether you want that disclosed or not. Really. One of the great little footnotes of your life story, and I've encouraged you to do an entire piece about it, and you haven't done it.
You've had so many great ideas for me that
Mishka has a very specific fan base that let's just say could probably lead to a long series of novels, very entertaining novels. So I get a lot out of it too. I'm just saying, an editor always does too. Because I'm just the person behind the curtain, maybe offering this insight or this suggestion or a title here and there. And it's a fun collaboration, and I love that part of it. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I think it's the collaboration that works both ways. You have to learn how to do that, or you won't get anywhere. Because there's probably a lot of writers out there who are just pig-headed assholes who just stuck in about it, and have never, and as a result, never ended up making it. I can think of a few actually that I've worked with.
Yeah, I mean, there was a friend of mine. There was a friend of mine who I really went to bat for trying to get a Kindle single published, and then he like pushed back really, really hard on taking edits, and I was like, man, this is, and that ended up, and that piece died, and that ended up being the beginning of the end of that friendship.
It's funny. Some people just aren't built. I mean, you were built to be a writer. I mean, you had the constitution for it and the emotional intelligence for it and all this stuff, and you have to. I mean, I've had some writers who still struggle with some of that, but ultimately when they put the ass in the chair and open up the laptop, the words come out. I mean, some writers just have to go through crazy neurotic processes. I think you're a little less neurotic though, which is fortunate for you.
We'll see if I'm getting better or worse.
It's people though who say, "Oh my God, I just land in my chair first thing in the morning, a hot cup of coffee, open up the laptop. 8 hours later, it's still just laughing myself through the day." I'm like, "Go fuck yourself. You're not a writer. You couldn't possibly be a writer. That's just what you described doesn't exist in the known universe of real writers. You're producing garbage." Without a doubt.
Yeah. If you're not suffering, it's not real. I mean, there's nothing more terrifying to me than turning on the computer and looking at a blank page.
I am fond of saying, in so many different instances, but it really applies here, is, if it wasn't hard, if it wasn't hard, everyone would be doing it.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
This shit is hard. Literally, if it wasn't hard, we'd have 3 billion writers in the world. It would be horrifying. God forbid that. So the good news is, and it's sort of the good news is the bad news. You and I both lived through what was being called the long form revolution. You remember that?
Yep.
It was a brief period of time when long form, and you were the beneficiary of it because you were publishing long form journalism. at the moment when this was being celebrated, and you got caught up in some of that.
I mean, and
We ended up on the front page of the New York Times, remember, and in other instances beyond your stories. Anyway, so but that revolution, the problem with the concept of that revolution was that I kept saying to people, there's no increase in the number of talented people in the world. I'm sorry, it just didn't happen. There wasn't some sudden weird genetic quirk where suddenly there were like 10% more talented people. So the same number of good articles were going to get published, no matter how many articles total got published. So if you want to, like I'm saying, if you want to increase the number of bad long form journalism, go ahead. That's what's going to happen, and that is what happened.
It drives me nuts because this ketamine story, maybe it's not a book, but it's perfectly, it's a perfect Kindle single length, Two questions I want to cover before we get out of here. The first is the transition from writer to editor.
Mm-hmm.
Was that difficult for you? Was that emotionally difficult? Did you have a hard time sort of making that leap? I love teaching. I love helping other people. It was an incredible pleasure to help Sam Talent sort of get the word out about his book, and to see him blow up. But also I feel some jealousy as a writer. I want people to be giving my shit 5 stars and buying my stuff.
Which is that? Wait, I'm sorry.
Sam Talent, Running the Light.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So for me, it was, quick, relatively. I always had, this is why I was reluctant to do the podcast. Apologies to everybody. I'm really bad at if I say anything about myself that sounds self-congratulatory, I feel bad and guilty. But then I think, no, I should feel better about myself. I did these things. I can talk. And now I've just now gone down this rabbit hole, and I can't remember what I was making reference to. Oh, the transition to editing. I was having a lot of ideas. So I had a lot of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a theory held by a lot of journalism professors that ideas are the coin of the realm in the journalism profession. So, if you had a lot of them, that meant you had more coins. So I always had more ideas than I knew what to do with. And then so when I became an editor, I suddenly found out, oh, I see. So, and this, Mishka, that I had toyed with a book that I was going to write called The Long Run. It didn't end up happening. And I had that title on my list of just titles. It was strictly related to running marathons. I didn't have the alcoholism piece. And I thought of it for you, and it just made so much more sense. So that was one of the first moments where I thought, oh, I see how this works. I've got these ideas that I never really was the right person to do. And now I go out and I find the right person to do it, and I give them the idea, and then they write it, and it becomes their story. Yeah. And that was really, fun for me. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of gifted writers who have had fascinating, interesting life experiences, personal ones that they've written about.
I don't think, or let me rephrase that. I'm sure that The Long Run wouldn't have happened without you forcing me to do it and giving me that title. It was a huge catalyst.
Well, look, you had the experience, so I just was imagining. But some of that's also maybe helpful because you get to the benefit of knowing what people's imaginary view of, being an alcoholic is versus the reality. Although that's why, as an outsider, to me, a bar fight seemed like a cool thing because as an outsider who doesn't drink, when people are in bar fights, that always seems to me to be indicative of what's wrong with drinking because it gets you into bar fights.
Yeah.
And I just knew that I did not want to be in a bar fight. And therefore I would probably be moderate in my alcohol.
The last physical fight I engaged in was getting my fucking socks on this morning.
Yeah, that's his hard shit now. I mean, now, just getting through the day is like a battle where we win every day. It's, touching your toes, doing all the physical exercise. But I It was fun. It was a fun transition. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. I mean, it also encompassed then managing people and
Mhm.
being a boss, and at certain unfortunate moments,
But
having to do things that your employees didn't want you to be doing. Those kinds of things that you had to do as a manager. Very difficult.
But you still got to write some incredible pieces too. I mean, the Kindle single with Bourdain, the interview with Obama.
Well, yeah, the interviews. We were lucky we started this thing. I was always interested in interviews, from the Playboy interview when I was a kid, and that was my model. And yeah, so we started the Kindle Singles interview, and I got super lucky. I got to do, I mean, I'm not. My kids really don't even allow me to mention it anymore. But the Obama. I mean, I'll just say, I did get to meet. When I look back on these last 12 years, I'm getting to meet actually two, because I spent time with Biden too. He wasn't president at the time, but so, but I got to spend 37 minutes with Barack Obama.
Are you going to hit him up to write the foreword for your book?
Barry and I are so close. I can't even tell you. We are just.
He won't stop texting you.
We're going out. He wants to have a cigarette later. He still goes out. That's you run into him on the corner because he's still out there sneaking those little, vaping.
Buying Lucy's at the corner.
He kept reading all those articles while he was president about vaping. He was like, man, the minute I get out of this White House, I'm getting myself the best fucking vape ever was created. Michelle will never know.
So, my last question is, what's next for you? I mean, personally and professionally, you're leaving a gaping hole in my life by leaving Audible.
My main concern,
I don't know what I'll do.
Look, mostly I'm focused on figuring out how to, make sure that all the people that are annoyed at me for quitting or leaving or changing my life in any way is affecting them. So obviously I'm going to work on trying to fix their situation, because that's most important. Mine, I'll get around to it. I'm still figuring it out. I want to be, engage the creative side of my brain more. Sometimes editing just involves logistics and management of things and management of people even. So, it's just nice to be on my own for a little bit and clear out the cobwebs and re-engage those muscles. Because they don't really work if you don't use them. As writing is one of those things. If you stop doing it, I've never been one of those morning pages people. That seems weird, but or I've never even been a journaler, but I like being paid, frankly, for writing. And honestly, that's been a big part of my whole approach to the business of what I do. I've always liked, that was one of the things I really dug about Kindle Singles was you had to buy them, we're not free. Yeah. And a lot of the long form shit that was being put out was just websites and whatnot. Come on, let's make people pay for this stuff. This is good. This guy, Mishka, you lived this horrifying experience. The least you should do is get your $1.99.
This is the other thing too, is that without
so cheap,
without that deadline and without the paycheck, I don't know that I would have written anything, and that's another thing that we all struggle with imposter syndrome at different turns. And I feel in some ways that I'm not a real writer because I didn't just sort of sit down and write a book. I'm like a chore monkey. Like I needed somebody to provide me with a job list, and like after you're done with this, then you get your allowance, and and I wonder if any of the stuff would have happened if it wasn't for a deadline looming over me, a reader waiting to read it and waiting to work on it and pick it apart, and then a paycheck at the end of it.
Yeah, a paycheck is really crucial. I mean, if you, I actually just only learned this recently. I saw some agent talking about how you decide who you pick as a client. And this woman was saying, I try to look at the client and say, is this somebody who can make a full-time living as a writer?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't imagine them making a full-time ongoing paycheck from writing, then you shouldn't represent them.
Wow.
I mean, that's smart, because why should you? It shouldn't be on you that somebody can't pay their rent. You don't want that burden. You want somebody who you really believe can make money,
Yeah.
or you shouldn't
Yeah.
take them on. You should, and then your job is to commit to making that a reality. That becomes your job, the agent's job.
Yeah.
I mean, but anyway, I thought but that's a whole other subject we could talk for days about. But but the truth is, it does come down to us to be good enough to do this. And look, I love I don't know is the right word, meritocracy, but I do think the fact is that the best and the most talented and the people who do this better than anyone else tend to be the most successful. I mean, it's the way it should be. It's nice when that gets rewarded, and it's fun to see shows like Severance or whatever, things that just sort of pop out. Or I was just remembering it from last year. There was a movie called Zola from the summer of, I think, 2021. It was just this incredible, Coleman Domingo, incredible movie. There's every so often you see something that's like, this isn't like anything I've ever seen before. There's a completely new way of telling a story, and it really is cool. Like, that's the kind of shit that I really would love to do and be responsible for. So I'll end on that. Yes, I want to do stuff like that. Stuff that people go, wow, I haven't thought of doing it that way. But whatever that is, I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, just something like a glass of ice water in your face, something that's like
I mean, Kindle Singles was sort of that. People were kind of like, oh, okay, right, between magazine and book. All right, I guess I get that. I don't know. It sounded good.
I mean, it was it was both recherche and looking for and looking forward, because I do think that you were sort of pulling on when the New Yorker would run serial pieces stretched over 3 issues or something, but also to have the vision of somebody who's traveling, they're about to get on a 3-hour flight and they don't have anything to read, that they have their Kindle, and then they can buy a thing for less than the cost of a slice of pizza, right? Less than the cost of a subway ride. That then they can consume on the flight. And
that's right.
And they can be reading, the end.
And you got your the beginning, middle, and that was why I was always so insistent on beginning, middle, end.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, especially like in the true crime space, they would end their pitches and go, and we don't know what happened. It could be anybody's. Like, that's not good enough. We want people to, when they finish reading the story, they know who did it.
Yeah, to have some closure.
And why. And it's hard. A lot of people struggle with that. But and it wasn't easy. Again, another one of those things that, like, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. Yeah. And everyone would be in it. And that was the whole joy of Kindle Singles, was that it was a small number of people getting to do it, including you, fortunately, and me.
Yeah.
So that was fun. Well, it was fun to reminisce and reflect on our collaboration, which I hope will continue. It's been very successful.
Yeah, I would love it if we did something down the line, and
make you some money so you can clean that room. Jesus Christ! Fucking God, can you not afford help?
Whenever I do a podcast, I look at the video recording of my disgusting room, and I'm like, "Fuck's sake, man, get it together, Jesus Christ!"
The man needs boxes. If any of you listening can send him crates or storage, or a GoFundMe for a storage unit.
Go clean me.
Fuck me.
I will.
Well, that's actually the Go Fuck Me. That's the porn version of GoFundMe.
Maybe that will be that'll be the next Kindle.
That's a business model. You just sign in and you pay your money in advance, and then
internet glory hole.
Yes.
Well, I will say that, like, I came back from tour January 18th, and it's March 8th, and I sort of wrapped projects in January and haven't started a new one yet. And it's been so fucking nice just to do things around the house that, like, I've been meaning to change that light bulb, or I've been meaning to fix the molding on that window. So I hope that you get an opportunity to don't go fucking grow an Al Gore beard, but do take like the victory lap of, like, just waking up at the same time you did for your normal job, and then doing all the shit little shit during the day that you wanted to do.
That's the only way to approach it. You have to fake it till you make it is the expression, I believe.
I'm just saying allow yourself.
So that's not the expression.
Yeah, no. I'm saying
it is actually.
Allow yourself. Get coffee and dessert at this point. Because like you've been working your ass off for a long time, and then when you are ready for your next creative endeavor, I look forward to listening to your podcast.
Oh my God, there will be no podcast. I guarantee. That was the one that we're announcing here today, that there will be no podcast in my future. And
just by saying that is the fastest and easiest.
That's the
way
cut
of making
to.
it happen.
That's what my wife is a television writer. It's called a cut to moment, and she just walked into the room. So I hope it isn't, but you might be right. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Take care,
Dave. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Folks, thank you so much for listening. I know there's a million podcasts out there. We appreciate you spending your time with us. If you're digging the show, if you're enjoying it, if these conversations move you, make you laugh, annoy you, piss you off, please take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. It helps us grow the show, and it helps other people find it. If you'd like to hear bonus episodes, song demos, just sort of ranting off the cuff conversations, all sorts of different bonus material, writing advice, personal blog posts, and stuff like that, go to patreon.com/Mishka Shabali. We will be having monthly episodes up there with my mom and I answering questions from readers, and there's all kinds of good stuff there. Thank you so much for supporting.